Thank you so much for coming and joining us tonight for the second webinar in the 2023-2024 Community Science LI webinar series. My name is Ariel Santos. I am a conservation scientist with CTUC Environmental Association, and I will be moderating tonight's webinar. The goal of the Community Science LI webinar series is to highlight various community science opportunities around Long Island and how the data accumulated by the public influences local environmental management efforts. And the Community Science webinar series is brought to you by CTUC, the Long Island Sound Study, New York Sea Grant, the Peconic Estuary Partnership, and the South Shore Estuary Reserve. So this webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be available on CTUC's website shortly after the webinar concludes. Your video and microphones are turned off, but you are free to ask questions in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. If you don't have a question but want to share a resource or discuss amongst the group, you're more than welcome to enter that into the chat box. So tonight's webinar will cover two of the most long-standing community science projects in the country monitoring winter bird populations, Audubon's Christmas bird count and the New York State Ornithological Association's waterfowl count. We're super excited to have a count coordinator from each program with us tonight to tell us more about these initiatives and how we can get involved. So first up, we have Cliff Hagan, who is president of Protectors of Pine Oak Woods, Staten Island's oldest volunteer environmental preservation organization. He conducts regular owl prowls through the fall and winter, as well as the annual First Day Hike in collaboration with New York State DEC. For the past number of years, Cliff has been the Staten Island compiler for both the Christmas bird count and waterfowl count, and now Region 10 compiler for 5 years. And after that, we have Jennifer Wilson Pines, who has been the co-compiler for the North Nassau Christmas bird count for over 10 years. She is a past president, current conservation chair, a field trip leader, and newsletter editor for the North Shore Audubon Society. She also contributes to the 3rd New York Breeding Bird Atlas and Audubon Climate Change Surveys. So with that and introductions out of the way, Cliff, take it away. You can share your screen.
Terrific. Thank you very much, Ariel. I appreciate the introduction. And hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Cliff Hagan. You got that correct. And I am president of Protectors of Pine Oak Woods out here on Staten Island. And just to put everybody at ease, I guess, I am not a scientist. Right? I have no formal training in biology or environmental studies. I'm just a hobbyist. I'm a fellow who enjoys going bird watching. I'm a New York City school teacher, married with 3 kids on Staten Island, way out on Staten Island. It's a different world over here. But because I enjoy birds, I devote quite a bit of time to learning about birds, sharing about birds, and now have taken a lead in the community that enjoys birds here on Staten Island, throughout New York City, and now in a greater part through what we call Region 10, which is all of Long Island as well. If my slides will work correctly. Let's see, there we go. No, too far. Sorry, folks. So yeah, as Ariel suggested, I am what they call the compiler. They organize what they call Region 10 for the New York State Ornithological Association's annual waterfowl count. And it began 50 years ago. Last year was the 50th anniversary. We're now looking at 51st year of folks going out in the field, regardless of the weather, in January, and counting each and every species of waterfowl that they can count. And it's a statewide waterfowl count throughout the entire state of New York. And we count any of 49 different species. It's all of the ducks, the geese, the swans, the cormorants, the loons, the grebes, anything that's in the water, coots, and loons. I'm not sure if I mentioned loons, right? So there's 49 different species that we go out in the field on one particular day, and we try to identify each and every one that we could find. All of that then is compiled, and that data is quite useful at the state level and even at the local level. Um, so for example, here on Staten Island, I run this Protectors of Pine Oak Woods. It's an environmental organization. We work to advocate for the preservation of open space on Staten Island. The data that's collected these past 50 years and over 100 years in the Christmas bird count is very consistent, valuable data that we use when we work on our draft environmental impact statements. Right? When we go to city council, when we go to state assembly to advocate for or against the development of certain properties, this data is quite useful. It's important that we're out doing this work locally and also nationally, internationally, taking a look at population spread, population density, how well the population fluctuations. It tells us a lot about the health of the environment in a particular area and on a larger scale. We're going to look particularly at Region 10. New York State is broken into 10 separate regions. All of Long Island and New York City comprises Region 10. It's the largest and most productive region in the state. And this here is a count sheet from the New York State Ornithological Association's website. It's easy enough to find, and all of this data is available there. This is the most recent, 2020, the year 2020, and this is the last of the data for 2020. It's the last sheet, and I share that because it shows the totals for each of the 10 regions. I'm not sure what the other 9 regions are. I know that we're number 10. We're the southernmost portion of the state of New York, so we're the last. And you could tell by these numbers, we are by far the most productive. There were just over 380,000 waterfowl counted in 2020 in the state of New York, which includes the Great Lakes, Lake George, the Hudson River, pretty vast area throughout the Adirondacks. And nearly half of the birds, the waterfowl in the state of New York, are here in Region 10. So it's an important area. It's crucial that we get out and find all of these. You can recognize region, I'm sorry, the faces are in the way. Region 3, Montezuma, which is up in the Adirondacks, or just past the Adirondacks. That's the second highest total of waterfowl count in 2020. And it's not even half of what we have here in Region 10. So Region 10 really is incredible. And Region 7 is the slightest count, the lowest count, just under 4,000. Year after year, CTUC Environmental takes part in the waterfowl count. Enrico, sorry, I'm blanking on his last name, helps out. He organizes that out there in Long Island. And CTUC alone, their count last year was nearly 8,000 waterfowl. More than half of them, nearly 5,000, were one species in particular, greater scarp. But just one small count on Long Island far surpasses some of the smaller counts throughout the state. So again, I stress, it's really important that we have terrific participation here in Region 10. We strive to get complete coverage of an area. For example, well, here we go. Region 10 is all of New York City and Long Island. Long Island, you all know, you probably live out there, 120 miles long, 118 miles long, about 20 miles wide. That's a huge area. And there's only 8 separate count areas in New York City, which means that there's 18 count areas on Long Island. Those are large areas. And it takes a lot of footwork, a lot of driving around, a lot of energy to cover those count areas completely. So we need help. It would be terrific to have more participation because we want complete coverage. Here on Staten Island's only 14 miles long, 7 miles wide, and we divide Staten Island into 13 territories. We have pretty good coverage here on Staten Island. It's smaller than most of the count territories on Long Island, and we have plenty of folks counting here on the island. Last year, we had nearly 10,000 species of waterfowl, 27 different species. Here are just a sampling of some freshwater waterfowl. There's a ruddy duck, a horned grebe, beautiful hooded merganser, That's what's particular about the southern tier of New York State. Even in the deepest of winters, we often have open water. Much of the northern tier is frozen in, so the waterfowl is unavailable, uninterested. They come south, and so in our open water fresh waters, we often get wintering waterfowl down here in the freshwater as well as our salted waters. And these are lesser scarp and a greater scarp, a common goldeneye and a old school long-tailed duck. And that's what makes our region 10 unique. We have both fresh and salt water because there are ducks that prefer fresh water and ducks that would never be caught in salt water, and vice versa. And we were just talking earlier that Long Island, Staten Island, attracts a pretty diverse collection of rare birds as well. And this, you could tell that goose in the center is not a Canada goose, right? It's a subspecies, a cackling goose. And you can see it has a squat head. It's a smaller bird. It has a stubby little bill, different than a Canada goose. And when you're out counting, it's preferred that you should count with somebody who has a little bit of experience, that they could identify the slight differences between these species. It's important that we get these count correct. So just a couple of facts about the waterfowl count. We had 98 participants last year in Region 10. It's all of Long Island, all of New York City. You know, I don't know how many millions of people live in that area, but we had less than 100 participants. And there were 26 different count territories. As I said, 8 were New York City, so there were 18 counts out in Long Island. And on Staten Island, let's see, Staten Island means that we had 13 people participating here on Staten Island last year. So of those 98, only 85 were throughout those other 25 areas. That's just not enough participation, right? We need to have better coverage. And I encourage everyone, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. But also, if you're interested, please reach out. I have my email here, write it down. I think it'll be available after the fact. I'm very interested to find folks who would like to participate in different areas in Long Island. I'll be happy to connect you with the people who are already counting in particular territories. All you have to do is reach out, let me know where you're interested in going, maybe where you live, and I will certainly connect you. So I appreciate your time. If you have any questions, I don't see anything in the chat yet.
Yeah, not yet. Cliff, that was great. Thank you so much. We're gonna do just a few questions now because Cliff has to hop off. So if anyone has any questions, you could pop them into the chat or the Q&A. I had a quick question. What do you think is the most influential factor to Region 10 being the most productive area for the waterfowl count?
Sure, there's a couple of things in particular. Like I said, habitat. Birds are very habitat specific. So here we offer saltwater and freshwater. Waterfowl need open water, and we have both freshwater and saltwater. Most years, our larger lakes, even some of the smaller ponds, remain clear of ice. So, and up north, things tend to freeze in. So there's not a lot of open water up north. And there are times, it's almost fun, because there are times where the weather will change the week before the count. So the count is usually the Martin Luther King weekend. And so the week before that, second week of January, we often get some heavy snows. The weather will turn for the worst. And it will certainly turn for the worst up north. And if they have all of a sudden some deep freeze and some heavy snows up north, there are days on the count where we just have hundreds of snow geese and Canada geese migrating past the area. It's really fun to watch that even in middle of winter, weather dependent, there is still migration going on. There's still movement.
That's awesome. Super interesting stuff. We have one question in the chat. What are the requirements to participate?
Terrific. I appreciate that. As long as you could see and you're fairly mobile, that's pretty much it. There is no level of expertise necessary. For example, you and I, whoever is asking this question, if you're a novice, you and I walk up to a pond and there's 300 common ducks, a couple of geese, and maybe some rare or different other geese or ducks. You could simply count those common ducks, the mallards, and maybe you count 300 of them while I'm busy looking at the more rare things, right? Having even a novice around to help with the count allows the people with more experience to spend more time looking for those novel birds, right? So there is no level of experience necessary. It's just a willingness to participate, a willingness and ability. And it would be great if you had a pair of binoculars, right? Because often, especially along the beaches, the saltwater, the ducks are off the beach 20 yards, 50 yards, 100 yards off. So it would be important to have binoculars as well.
Good point. All right. I saw that the chat's disabled for some reason, so I'm going to go ahead and try and fix that in the meantime. But I think that's the last question for this part of the Q&A. And like Cliff said, if you have any other questions that pop up, I'll put his email in the chat. So please feel free to email him with any follow-up questions. Cliff, thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, no, I
always happy to share birds and the love of birds with others.
It's awesome. Oh, perfect. You put it in the chat.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
So if anybody is interested, has questions, concerns, please feel free to reach out. I'll be happy to get back to you and have connect you with the community, the birding community out there in Long Island.
Awesome. Thank you so much again, Cliff.
You bet. Thank you.
Have a good night.
Thanks.
All right. So it looks like I fixed the chat. So if people want to throw some things in there, you should be able to now. Next up, we have Jennifer Wilson Pines. So whenever you're ready, you can share your screen.
Okay. Oops. Can everybody see this?
Yep, looks good.
Okay, good. The Christmas bird count is the longest running citizen science program in the world at this point. We are starting year 124, and it's I'm going to go through a little bit of the history and then look at some of the statistics that we've some of the interesting trends that we've found in the particular count that I compile for, which is North Nassau, and that's from the Queens Line basically out to Oyster Bay along the North Shore and the Sound. So the Audubon Society came into being in 1896. There were a couple of, ladies in Boston who decided to form an organization to sort of turn women away from using feathers on their hats, because they were basically wiping out the egret population just for the purposes of having fancy feathers on the hats. And this quickly was appreciated by other groups, other people like-minded. You can see that very rapidly different states formed their own Audubon societies, and they created a magazine, Bird Lore, and the editor for that was Frank Chapman. So not long after the organization had been founded in Massachusetts and then spread, there was another thing that was going on which caused great numbers of bird deaths, and that was called the Christmas side hunt, where after enjoying a delicious meal, they would go out and blow to smithereens every living animal that they could find. Songbirds, game birds, it didn't really matter. Everything was for numbers. It was quite a slaughter. So Frank Chapman decided to propose that instead of shooting birds, he put this into bird lore and asked people to go out and count birds and then send the statistics on to him. And this was just at the turn of the century, the Christmas bird census, he called it. And the first Christmas bird census had 27 count areas, and they came up with 90 species. And they were not just in the East, it was diverse. There were actually a couple, there was up in Toronto, Canada, there was some on the East Coast, some on the West Coast. Iowa had an early count, and they this was the very beginning of the Christmas bird count. And oops, sorry, where that came up. This is the Christmas bird count today. And as you can see, it's up through mostly in the United States, but throughout Canada. And let's see if I can't see this. Canada and South America. Now there's counts also in some of the American territories, Hawaii, Guam, Midway Island. So the last year, because we haven't started the count yet, we had 2,621 count circles, and a circle is a 15-mile diameter circle, and they tallied up to 2,554 species, which, when you consider that you can really only see about 900 species in the northern hemisphere, means that the people in South America really doubled down and came up with more than like a third more. So there's probably about 1,500 species that would be accounted for by Central and South America, and a lot fewer counters there. So they did quite a job. And it's not just people going out into the field. Feeder counters are needed. We undercount some of the most common birds because we're out in the woods and they're hanging around people's backyard feeders. I always tell my participants, don't come back without a house sparrow. So this is when you zoom in on that map, which is online if you just go to Google, Audubon, the National Audubon's website, and look for Christmas bird count. There are 10 circles on Long Island and 4 more in New York City itself. One of the oldest counts is Central Park. That's one of the originals. They were there, they started the first year and have been continuous ever since. North Nassau, my count, we're in our 71st year. And many of the counts on Long Island are quite long standing, so they've been able to compile quite a lot of statistics. And when you zoom in on those circles, if you click the little center one, you get a box that tells you what count it is, who the compiler is, how to get a hold of them, and what the count date is if you're interested in joining. So we don't have complete coverage. You can see some overlap and there's some gaps in between, but they're not looking to census every bird in the United States. What they're mainly looking for is we're going to have a statistical compilation, which will give us a pretty good idea of what's going on in those overall. So this is what it used to be. We did it on paper. We had little paper handouts that you could give to people for ticking it off. And we'd get together for a dinner at the end of the day. And each count group, as you can see, there are different sectors, and each one of those sectors within the count circle has a leader and a team. And so we would come together and have a nice dinner, and then we would compile the statistics, and we would do that on paper. So we would go through the list of all of those birds, and each of the sectors would give their numbers, and those would be compiled onto another piece of paper. But now we have eBird. So everybody reports into eBird, where you can compile those statistics into one group. I mean, there is still some paperwork, and now got a fancy digital map. So things move along. And one of the things that this has allowed us to do is to look at all sorts of statistics around the count. Now that everything is digitized, one of my co-compiler, Glenn Quinn, has gone and digitized all of our statistics going back to 1953. So that's made a wealth of data available to us, because most of the early counts are really only available on paper. And it's also allowed Glenn to create some really good charts. And so we're going to kind of nerd out on some statistics for a while. So this is the total species frequency. And you can see that we tend to...
Jennifer, you accidentally muted yourself. I still can't hear you. Valerie, are you able to hear Jennifer?
There's quite a range, and we have hits and misses. Over the years, we've added species to the list, and we've taken them off as they just disappeared and we no longer saw them anymore. That's just a graph of the numbers, and you can see that from the beginning, when we had fewer people out and we're covering less areas, that we've managed to, and I think also it has to do with the abilities of the counters to find the more rarer birds. And temperatures, yeah, why this is also why some of the statistics on the count can vary quite a bit, because if you go out and it's a lovely 54-degree day like over here, then you're going to get a whole different group of birds than if it's 11 like it was in 1983. But regardless of the weather, we go out. I mean, I've done this count in slush, in rain, in snow, in 20-mile-an-hour winds, and on very lovely days too. So this is the total overall numbers of birds. And one of the things that drives those numbers used to be the greater scop, which we used to see in large rafts, but those have disappeared. You can see here at the end that we have fewer numbers, and the Canada geese, which we see in very, very large numbers. Participants, it's come and gone. The lows you see down there are COVID, basically. So from these 70 years of data, we've seen trends, and there's different reasons for different trends over time. There's been natural and man-made disruptions. We've seen birds that have changed their ranges, both expanding north and expanding south. And then things that we could probably put down to climate change or habitat loss, other factors like there's no longer a food resource available in the area. And then there's ones where we just don't know why that it's changed. So Unfortunately, I can't see what the top of this is. Uh,
Looks like American Crow. Now it's Blue Jay.
okay, all right. Let me go back then. All right, so this is American Crow. No, this is Blue Jay.
Yep.
All right, so one of the things that happened with Blue Jays here in 1999, that's West Nile. And the numbers drop off quite a bit. The most impacted birds from West Nile were the corvids, and that's the blue jays, the crows, and ravens are also in that group, but they were so we didn't have very many of them here, so there's not, they are sort of statistically irrelevant. And looking at these numbers, I kind of wonder whether or not it was actually occurring earlier than that, because the numbers had dropped considerably and it just hadn't been detected. But you can see that they have rebounded. And, you know, some of the lows, it's random. It has to do with how many counters we had out, what the weather was like. But the statistical line from, you know, they've rebounded since 1999. It is going uphill. Now, the American Crow, on the other hand, just dropped off the cliff. And again, you can see that 1999, and then they were really hit badly by West Nile, and they have not recovered. But the fish crow, on the other hand, I've always had a personal theory that they were much more resistant to West Nile disease, because we had very low numbers of them for many, many years, and then they just suddenly went crazy. We, you know, the numbers of birds that we see bounded up considerably. So this is, I can't read this, Ariel, can you? I can't see the top of my screen.
It's Canada goose.
Okay, Canada geese. Canada geese are very interesting. I mean, they are supposed to be here in the winter because they're migrating down from their breeding grounds in Canada. But what you see here with the very low numbers back in the 50s is, back in the 50s, they had been hunted very close to extinction, enough so that different state departments of wildlife were very concerned about it. And they came up with this grand scheme to capture mated pairs and to breed them down in the lower 48. So they did that. And then the interesting thing about geese is that they imprint to breed where they are born. So those geese no longer migrated. So we created a second population of domestic or non-migratory geese. And now we had two breeding populations. And as the geese population is increasing, the hunter population is decreasing. So we now have very, very significant, and particularly on Long Island, there really aren't that many predators for geese. You know, they're might be taken out by the occasional dog or hit by cars. But on the whole, they really don't have a lot of natural predators. They live 15 to 16 years. They start breeding when they're 3 or 4, and they breed right up until the day they're gone, until they die. So a typical goose will successfully rear 4 to 6 chicks every year. So you can see what that does to the numbers. So this is I didn't have Glenn give me a chart on this, but I was able to pull this up from eBird. This is a function called species maps, where you can manipulate the years you're looking at and the, you know, the months. The bald eagle, this, what we're looking at here is DDT. So this is up until 2010. And you can see that, you know, there were a handful of sightings. They're here, they're random, they're here and there. This is over a decade. So this is all the bald eagles that are seen over a decade. And they had still were doing pretty well up north. There were some attempts to hack them into this area that were not successful. But they rediscovered Long Island and they recolonized it on their own, because this is the last 10 years. And as you can see, the eagles have very successfully recolonized Long Island, and they did that spreading from the north. They expanded their range south. and you're going to see them more, grouped around water bodies because they will hunt for other animals, but fish is their preferred food. And again, with the osprey, again, what we're seeing here, this is the impact that DDT had on those populations, just really almost annihilated them. And now they've rebounded tremendously. So this is the last decade of 20 years with the current sightings. And
This one is
what am
gulls.
I? Yes. All right. So this is a different thing. What we're seeing here is the closure of open landfills. And once that food resource disappeared, you can see that the numbers of gulls dropped way down. And they are probably now at what's sustainable levels. And those landfills were sustaining them at enormous population levels, which also had an impact on other birds that they prey on. If you've ever been to the South Shore, to the big tern colonies at Nickerson, the gulls are preying on the tern babies. And when you have these enormous numbers of gulls, that had an impact on other species, because if they weren't eating garbage, they were preying on the young of other birds. And they will not, I mean, I have seen great blackbacks take down like adult mallards. So it's not just baby birds, they're pretty significant predators.
This one is
And
great.
this is, yeah, this is one of those mysteries. And I had asked Cliff about this before we went on, because one of our largest numbers of waterfowl on the count was always great scaup. We had huge rafts of them off the beaches, and then they just sort of fell off the cliff. So we don't know where they are. This is throughout the Northeast that their numbers have dropped enormously, and some of those may just be gone. They may have moved elsewhere. There may be another food resource, and we don't really know why they've dropped off this much and they're not in this area anymore, but it's somewhat worrying.
This one is American
And
kestrel.
American kestrel, another one that we really don't know why they've just disappeared, but you can see we just don't see them anymore. And this is something that's happened within my memory, like in 20, 25 years ago, there would be a kestrel sitting on the wires like every mile. They were a common bird, and now you'd be hard pressed to find one. Now this is
The northern
cardinal,
Mhm.
northern cardinal. This is a bird that was a southern bird, and if you can see back in the 50s, it was a pretty rare bird, and people would actually come to see a cardinal on Long Island. But they expanded their range north over time, and they've been pretty successful. They are very happy in the suburban setting. They love people's feeders, and they do very, very well. And they've kept expanding their range northward.
Here we have
This is,
mockingbird.
sorry,
The northern mockingbird.
northern mockingbird, another one that has expanded its range south. And as you can see, at the up until the mid 60s, it was an extremely rare bird. Particularly in the winter, we might have had some in the summer, and then like the catbird, they would have left again. I'm not sure why that number seems to be trending down. I suspect it has the same thing to do with why we don't have as many English sparrows on the count as I think that there really are out there, because these are feeder birds. They will, if you've got a suet feeder, you've got a mockingbird pretty much in the winter. And they are mostly like berries and insects. They're not really seed eaters, but they will come to suet. And I think and this is Carolina wren.
Mhm.
Okay. Again, another one that expanded its range, and very recently, because you can see that up until almost 1990, they were almost non-existent in the winter, and they would not do well, but they have made some interesting adaptive changes. They are insectivores, but they have learned to eat suet, and they have actually learned to eat small seeds. I've seen them on my own feeder eating white millet, the very tiny white seeds. I guess it's small enough that they can crack it open with their bills. So they have made some really fundamental changes to their diet in order to survive up here over the winters. Although when we do have a bad winter, their population does get knocked down pretty well. And
This one's the common raven.
common raven. This is an interesting one. They expanded. They are a corvid like the blue jays and the crows, but because they were virtually non-existent, as you can see, up until the 2010, that that we didn't really see a significant change with West Nile because they just weren't even here. But they recolonized the island. There was a brood in Huntington and another one at the Nassau County Art Museum in Roslyn. And as they began to reproduce, those numbers have climbed quite a bit. So I pulled up some eBird, and you can see here, this is from 1970 to 2000, and that they were primarily across the northern tier, and down along that line of purple that you see running down, that's along the Adirondacks. So they, at altitude, they were still present. However, this is now, they have widened their range tremendously, and they are in areas that, they were not found at all just 10 years ago. So why should you participate in a Christmas bird count? Well, there's lots of good reasons. One I didn't put down here is you will feel morally superior to mere mortals. There are, as I mentioned, there are 10 different count circles on Long Island and 4 in New York City itself. There's a huge variety of habitat that's covered. The main compiler is listed on it. In our circle in particular, we've broken that up. I'm the people person. I organize the teams, and my co-compiler, Glenn, deals with the numbers and statistics. And I also have another co-compiler, Brendan Fogarty, and he's did that nice digital map for us, and he also deals with organizing a number of the teams. So it's a lot of fun. We always need and welcome feeder counters. So you would just need to look at that map and see whether or not your house lies within one of those count circles. And then one of the things that you're going to see if you're out there, basically from before sunrise, so that you can try and find some owls to sunset, is you're going to see a lot of birds. All of these photos were taken in Decembers of past years. So there's plenty of birds out there. You just have to actually get out there and really look for them. From the woodlands to the water, there's just a lot of variety to be found here on Long Island, as Cliff was mentioning, because we are an island. We have salt and fresh water, we have woodlands, we have grasslands, we have an enormous variety of habitat for a pretty suburban and urbanized place, and we get a lot of birds. So these are the 2 links that I'd want to share. The top one is the main link to the Christmas bird count page. And then the second one is actually has a summary list for every Christmas bird count since 1900. If you want to nerd out on some statistics. And that's.
That was
Thank you
awesome.
very much.
Thank you so much. So I actually thought I had that link for the past records of the Christmas bird counts. If you have it handy and would like to put that in the chat, that would be great. I found the one from last year.
Okay, let me just.
Someone from the chat, Catherine said that she saw a raft of 25 to 50 scaup on Oyster Bay off of West Shore Road in Mill Neck today.
Is that in the mill pond?
Not sure. Maybe she'll let us
Okay.
know in the chat.
All right, did that just come up? The links?
Let's see. I don't.
Oh, there it goes. Okay.
There we go. Perfect. Thank you so much. Super interested to see all these historical counts. We have, I think, a question from Julia. Julia, would you like to put your question in the Q&A, or would you like to use your microphone? I can allow you to talk now.
Thanks. Can you hear me?
Yep. Hi, Julia.
Hey. So thank you for that presentation. Might those slides be available? Because there was a lot of words and it's hard, it's hard to read that fast. And I'm not sure if you're gonna make that available somewhere. The
Ariel,
slides that
you're-
Jennifer just did.
So as long as Jennifer and Cliff are comfortable, I can share the presentations. We will also have a recording of this webinar on CTUC's website as well.
Oh, okay, a recording on CTUC. All right, so I can like kind of freeze frame.
Yeah, and you can that way you can go to whatever page you're most interested in.
Yeah, the historical stuff was interesting. I'd like to read like what, look like newspapers or something, what they said. So my question is so this count, it's not on iNaturalist, right? It's with Audubon and they have their own...
Yes, it's run by the National Audubon Society, but they do work hand in hand with Cornell. Most of the circles are now e-birding their counts. Because it's so much easier, and that also immediately adds those numbers into a resource that's much more available to scientists and ornithologists.
So eBird is like an iNaturalist kind of thing, but it's called eBird.
Yeah, it's an app that you can get from a Cornell Lab of Ornithology. It's free. And if you download that to your phone, I recommend you also get one called Merlin. And Merlin is a bird identification one. It's loaded with birds you would find in your region, or you can just do all of North America if you travel, and different countries. It has sound recordings of the birds you can listen to. It has photos. It has basic descriptions. And eBird allows you to track your birds. It'll keep your life list. It'll keep your year list. It'll keep your county list, your state list. There's all kinds of ways of parsing out those statistics. Plus, it has a lot of really good information. Those map slides I showed you are from eBird, where I use their species map tool, which allows you to look at statistics from past, visualize how bird numbers have changed over time for different species.
Yeah, so I put the eBird website in the chat, and like Jennifer was saying, there's an eBird app, there's the Merlin app. I love the Merlin app because you could just take a picture and it'll identify it for you, again with the sound recordings too. It'll identify a bird by the sounds, which I find incredible that it's able to do that. And they're all free.
But you do need a grain of salt with that.
Yes.
Because it thinks that people are great horned owls.
Point.
And it can be faked out by mockingbirds and blue jays. I've had it tell me there was a red-tailed hawk and I'm looking at a blue jay being a jerk, doing a red-tailed hawk call in order to clear a feeder.
Yeah. That's a good point. Um, yeah, and iNaturalist is also a good app to have. Really cool programs.
But that's really more focused for fauna, for
Yeah.
flora. That's
Yeah.
more of a plant one. For birds, it's really eBird and Merlin. There are other apps for identifying birds, but those two work together. If you have both of those on your phone, you'll see on eBird when you have a count list going that there's a little Merlin icon for pops up, and if you click on that next, when you're counting on eBird, then it takes you right to Merlin for that particular bird.
That's cool. Yeah, they are connected.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really cool to have that. Catherine mentioned that it was on Oyster Bay where she saw the ska.
Yeah, they're out there. They're just not 20,000 of them anymore.
Yeah. I wonder what happened there. Yeah, because I guess it could be a function of so many things, and it's hard to really know exactly what
We don't know. I mean, it could have been a change in the food resource. It could have been, there could have been some kind of toxic event in their breeding grounds. I mean, we really don't know. And it's also like the kestrel. We don't know why their numbers have plummeted like that.
Right. I was going to ask if it seemed because of such large numbers, if you thought maybe it could be a mortality event. But again, it's hard to
Well,
say.
because things like that have happened. I mean, we've had some large mortality event with waterfowl because of lead shot,
Mm.
where they've consumed that and died.
Yeah, it's tough to say. Let's see if there's any other questions in the Q&A. I don't
So
see
I
it.
have another question.
Yeah, go.
I'd like to think that I'm a birder, but I know I'm not, because I can't distinguish the little things that distinguish some of the birds, and my eyes aren't that good. I do have binoculars, but I feel like they don't have the clarity, and then definitely I don't have a good camera to zoom in and take those lovely steady pictures that some people take. So if there's these circles, are there groups going out
Yeah,
on
within
that
each
day?
Yeah. Okay, so
Mhm.
each count, the count period runs from mid-December to the first week in January. And they came up with that based on historic counts. So that's now fixed in stone. I mean, it used to be more flexible, and each count circle picks a date. Sorry about that. Anyway, so each count circle picks a date. We generally go the first Saturday that's available. There will be, most of them are on the weekends for obvious reasons. It's hard to get enough people rounded up during the week. So there's usually you get about 3 weekends, so they're all doubled up. Like we're the first Saturday, the Queens count is the first Sunday. And like I said, there's 14 counts in this region, so many of those dates have multiple counts going on. People will take advantage of, like, New Year's Day. If that falls off of the weekend, most people are off, so that'll be a day that people can grab to do a count. So within each one of those count circles, I mean, everybody divides them up a little bit differently, but ours is divided into a little over, I think we have 14 sectors, and each one of those sectors has a team. So it'll be between 3 to 6 people working each one of those sectors. So we generally, we had some drop off during West Nile, but we generally have like 60 to 80 people out there, which is more than Cliff had for to cover all of Long Island. And most of the circles are similar because 15 miles is a lot of square mileage to cover. And most of it's, you're driving to locations, but then you're on foot. So it's time consuming, and it's the darkest days of the year. So you really don't have that much daylight to actually count in. I don't know if that answered your question.
It did. I'm getting a better perspective on on what the count means, and I'll definitely read up on it on the Audubon website.
Yeah,
To see
it's a
what-
fair amount of organizing to get this thing off the ground. You know, as I was asked, you know, whether you could start a new count circle, and you can. There are new count circles. I think there was like there were over 40 in the last year. But you know, you've got to round up enough people that you can actually provide adequate coverage for that area. And that's not necessarily an easy thing to do.
Yeah, I'm kind of in on the South Shore, near Fire Island National Seashore on the eastern side of it.
Well,
So
there's this,
Cap tree
yeah, there,
circle, right? Maybe?
not Captree, on the other side near Smith Point.
well, take a look at that map. If you go
Yeah.
to the Christmas bird count, you can find the map and you could see what region you're in, who the compiler is for that area. You know, so everybody has different. I take new birders because I figure everybody started that way somehow, but not all of the counts do. But most counts will take feeder counters. They're very happy for that if you're just starting out and you're not sure. You know, it's everybody has a different way of running things, but mostly most counts will, if you are prepared to get out there and spend the whole day, they'll find a team to fit you into.
All right, I'll check it out. All right, thank you.
Awesome. Thank you for the great questions, Julia.
Well, thank you.
And
Yeah.
I see another question about, do you partner with any local, state, and federal organizations? No, they're now Cliff's the winter waterfowl, that is in partnership. I don't think he mentioned it, but it's in partnership with the DEC.
Mhm.
They do waterfowl counts, and that has to do with hunting licenses, right? And whether they're, you know, what kind of numbers of birds are out there. They do need to know that. So this is the Christmas bird count is the National Audubon Society. They started it and have continued to run it. They do it in cooperation with Cornell Lab of Ornithology because they are the people who invented eBird. And but there are participants who are not necessarily Audubon chapters. There are bird clubs that do it. There are other kinds of organizations that participate in the Christmas bird count. I mean, the overall umbrella is the National Audubon Society, but you know, if you had another kind of organization that wanted to do a count circle or participate in them, and you know, and you can identify your birds, that's really pretty much all that's the qualification. It's not it's all volunteer except for, you know, the people who are crunching the big statistics who are employees of Audubon. And we, you know, everybody has a little bit different way of running the count. Our chapter actually provides a dinner at the end of it. Some places have a dinner in a restaurant, some don't have that at all. But we'd like to, you know, make it a little social event. We'll be getting back together for the first time since COVID. It's been 4 years since we've been able to meet in person for a compilation this year.
Wow. So there'll be lots to celebrate this year.
Yeah, yeah.
Awesome. So it's 8 o'clock now. I don't see any other questions in the webinar chat or the Q&A. So, oh, wait, we have some hands raised here. Maybe we'll take one or two more questions and then wrap up. Let's see. Wendy, I allowed you to unmute yourself if you want to shoot a quick question. Maybe it was an accident. Julia, did you have another question, or is your hand, did you just not put the hand icon down?
Sorry, I forgot to put the hand icon
Okay.
there.
No
So
problem.
I see my area is very varied because we have Fire Island, we have the marshlands, there is the Pine Barrens. Those are lots of choices. All
Right,
different
and
birds.
that's why we have such a like Cliff was
Variety.
saying, that we have such a variety of habitats available that we get a much wider variety of birds than you get, particularly upstate, also because they're having real winter when we're having flurries. So, and that makes a big difference. You know, our ponds we always have some ponds that are open. We've got we've got the sound, we have the bays, we've got you know, the ocean. So there's open water available for birds, and we've got lots of feeders and places for birds to stock up over the winter. So we're just able to host more birds and a variety of birds.
Definitely. All right, I'm psyched.
Glad to hear it.
Yeah.
Okay, there's 5 new messages.
I think it's most folks just saying thank you.
Okay.
So now it's 8:03, so to respect everyone's time, we'll go ahead and wrap up the webinar for tonight. I just want to take a moment to thank our panelists, Jennifer and Cliff. Thank you so much again for sharing your time and your knowledge with us. I also want to thank my colleagues from the Long Island Sound Study, New York Sea Grant, Peconic Estuary Partnership, and the South Shore Estuary Reserve. And finally, thank you all for joining us to learn more about winter bird surveying programs on Long Island. If you have any questions that were not answered today, please feel free to reach out to us. There will be a follow-up email with all of our contact information, all the links to the resources that we shared tonight, including a link to the recording that will be up shortly after we conclude. So again, thank you all, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your night.
Good night.
Have a good night, everyone.